The night Eric invited me to join him for a business dinner with a Japanese partner, I felt a heaviness I couldn't explain. Still, I smiled and agreed, just as he expected. He believed I would sit there quietly, unaware of every conversation happening around me. But I had learned the language he thought would shield him, and when his words sliced through the air, words he assumed I couldn't understand, I felt our marriage fracture in real time. I was 40 years old when my life finally began to fall apart. Though at the time, I didn't realize that was a blessing. My name is Lena Morales, and for almost 2 decades, I worked as a nurse at a small community hospital in Austin, Texas. It wasn't glamorous work. Nobody ever looked at a pediatric nurse and thought powerful or important, but I loved what I did. I loved the soft glow of night shift hallways, the little hands that held onto mine, the way some children fought for life with more bravery than most adults ever could. But outside the hospital doors, my world felt increasingly small. My husband, Eric, had risen through corporate ranks at a medical supply company. The higher he climbed, the more he spoke in quarterly projections and corporate jargon, and the less he seemed interested in anything that mattered to me. Somewhere between my 30s and 40, our conversations went from dreams and plans to simple logistics. Did you pay the water bill? Don't forget my dry cleaning. We have a dinner Saturday. Don't talk too much. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't violent. He just gradually forgot who I was. And maybe, in a way, I forgot too. But everything began to shift the year I met Ayumi Takahara. She arrived at the unit on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, her medical chart a thick stack of diagnoses and complications. She was in her 70s, born to a Japanese mother and an American father, and had lived most of her adult life between 2 cultures. When she was admitted, she barely spoke, just nodded politely, hands folded in her lap, eyes distant as if she were listening to something far away. Most nurses assumed she preferred silence. But on my second night shift caring for her, when the hallway was quiet and the monitors hummed like soft lullabies, she suddenly spoke. "You walk softly," she said in English, her voice thin but steady. Like someone who knows pain but does not complain about it. Her observations startled me so much I nearly dropped the chart. From then on, Ayumi and I talked slowly at first, then more deeply. She taught me small Japanese phrases, gently correcting my accent, smiling when I got something right, laughing when my tongue tangled around unfamiliar sounds. She told me stories about her mother, about kimono patterns and shrine festivals, and how every season in Japan has its own heart. I didn't know it then, but Ayumi was planting the seeds of the language that would one day save me. She became my teacher without ever calling herself one. During vital checks, during medication rounds, even while I helped her comb her hair, she slipped bits of Japanese into our conversations. Sometimes I would repeat a phrase perfectly, and she'd beam with pride. Other times, I'd mangle it badly, and she'd click her tongue and make me try again. The more I learned, the more something inside me stirred, something I hadn't felt in years. A spark, curiosity, life. It felt like rediscovering a part of myself I didn't know I had lost. But while Ayumi nourished my inner world, my marriage continued to thin out like an old bedsheet stretched too far. Eric started coming home later. He spent more time texting coworkers, especially one woman he claimed was just someone from procurement. He stopped asking about my day entirely, and I, for reasons I still don't fully understand, didn't push back. Maybe because the hospital absorbed so much of my emotional strength. Maybe because I'd learned to fold myself small, hoping that would keep the peace. One evening, as I prepared dinner, Eric came through the front door, humming something he hadn't done in years. "Lena," he said, loosening his tie. "I've got great news." I turned off the stove, surprised by his sudden excitement. "We're meeting someone important next week," he continued, A Japanese investor named Mr. Musashi. He's flying in to discuss a potential partnership with our company, and leadership wants me there to help pitch. It's a big deal. A career-making deal. That sounds nice, I said softly. So, what do you need? You, he said, pointing at me with his beer bottle. Investors like seeing stability, a polished family image. You'll come to dinner with us. Just be charming, look nice, and don't worry if you don't understand anything. They prefer to speak Japanese. It'll go right over your head. An old part of me winced. Eric didn't know had never asked how much Japanese I'd learned with Ayumi. He didn't know it had become a quiet lifeline for me, and I didn't tell him. Not because I wanted secrets, but because I'd grown tired of trying to impress a man who no longer cared to be impressed. I'll be there, I said. He kissed me absently and walked off to answer a call. I stared at the spot where he'd stood, at the half-empty beer bottle on the counter, at the small life I had squeezed myself into. And something inside me shifted just slightly, like a door cracking open. A week later, I stood in front of the mirror wearing a deep burgundy dress, something soft and understated. I tied my hair back the way Ayumi liked, leaving a few loose strands to frame my face. And as I glanced at my reflection, I whispered in Japanese, "Watashi wa omowareru yori tsuyoi." I am stronger than I seem. I didn't know then just how true those words would become. Because the night at Musashi's dinner table, the night that would shatter everything, was only 1 week away. The week leading up to the dinner felt strangely heavy, like the air before a storm when the sky is still blue, but the wind already knows what's coming. Eric became more animated than I'd seen him in years. Every night after work, he paced through the living room with his phone pressed to his ear, practicing talking points, rehearsing financial language, and name-dropping executive titles like charms he hoped would unlock some kind of promotion. "We land this deal, Lena, and everything changes," he said one night while adjusting his cufflinks in the hallway mirror. Musashi isn't just an investor. He's the kind of man who can open international doors. I nodded as I folded laundry on the couch. "That's exciting," I said softly. But he didn't hear my words. He heard his future. He didn't notice the way my hands trembled slightly when the memory of Ayumi teaching me polite Japanese phrases drifted back, the exact kind of phrases executives used in formal meetings. He didn't notice the faint ache in my chest when he said, "Just smile, okay? Don't talk too much. They won't expect anything from you." I wondered how long he'd seen me as something ornamental. On Thursday afternoon, we drove 3 hours north to Dallas, where the company had booked a private dining room at an upscale hotel restaurant. The kind of place where the napkins were folded like origami cranes and the waitstaff moved like ghosts. Eric spent the whole drive rehearsing the introduction he'd give. "Remember," he said, "just greet them politely and let me handle the communication." I smiled faintly. "Of course." And again, he didn't ask why that smile looked different this time. The hotel lobby smelled of citrus and marble polish. A fountain rippled in the center, its water catching the warm lights overhead. For a moment, I caught my breath. It looked like something out of the stories Ayumi used to tell me. "You look nice," Eric said, glancing at me quickly. But he didn't linger long enough for it to feel true. When we reached the restaurant, a hostess bowed slightly and guided us to a private room. Inside, 4 men in tailored suits were already seated. The eldest of them, hair silver at the temples, posture immaculate, was Mr. Musashi. His presence was quiet but commanding, like a still lake that hides its depth. Eric rushed forward with exaggerated enthusiasm. "Musashi-san, thank you for meeting with us. It's an honor." They exchanged greetings in Japanese, formal, respectful, a little stiff, and I caught every word. My heart beat steady, my face calm. I offered a polite bow when introduced, and Musashi acknowledged me with a small nod that carried more sincerity than Eric's entire introduction. Dinner began with small talk. The men discussed jet lag, business climates, and upcoming regulations. Eric over-enunciated his Japanese, trying a little too hard, but Musashi listened politely. I kept my eyes on my plate, my hands folded neatly, playing the role I'd learned to play after years beside Eric. Quiet, pleasant, unobtrusive. But inside, my mind was fully alert, listening for every nuance, every breath, every unspoken truth. Midway through the meal, Musashi shifted the conversation into Japanese naturally, seamlessly, and the rest of the table followed. Eric leaned back slightly, assuming I was lost, assuming I was tuning out. He didn't know that the moment the language changed, my world sharpened. Musashi asked about Eric's responsibilities at the company. Eric puffed up instantly, speaking with a pride I hadn't seen since he first got promoted years ago. He exaggerated just a little, but enough that I caught it. Then Musashi asked, gently, "And your wife? She is a nurse, yes? A respectable profession." Eric laughed lightly, waving a dismissive hand. "Well, yes, but at a small clinic. Nothing demanding. It keeps her busy." He added, "She doesn't understand the business world, but it's fine. She's supportive in her own, simple ways." The word simple stung like a wasp under my skin. But my face didn't move. And that was when it happened. I felt someone looking at me. Slowly, I lifted my eyes. Musashi was watching. Not rudely, not curiously, but perceptively. His gaze lingered, subtle but unmistakably aware, and for half a second, barely a breath, our eyes locked. I tried to school my face, but something flickered, a tightening around my eyes. A breath held, a truth trying to escape. Musashi saw it. His brows softened. A thoughtful, knowing recognition passed over his expression, as if he'd quietly realized. She understands us. She has been understanding everything. But he didn't say a word. Instead, with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, he shifted the topic, sparing me and sparing Eric from realizing just how much had been revealed in that single moment. Dessert came small matcha tarts and dark chocolate squares, and Eric seemed pleased with himself, oblivious to the currents moving beneath the table. He didn't notice the way Musashi asked me once, in careful English, if the meal suited my taste, as though testing the waters. I answered with a warm smile. "Yes, thank you. It's lovely." But inside, I was trembling not from fear, but from the sudden clarity that something enormous was unfolding. This dinner wasn't just a corporate formality. It was the beginning of the end of my old life. Because if Musashi could sense my secret, then what else would unravel before the night was over? And what would I hear? What truth would finally cut deep enough that would push me to change everything? I didn't know. Not yet. But the storm that had been gathering around my life for years was finally about to break. The moment the waitstaff cleared the plates, I felt the atmosphere shift. The easy politeness of the evening melted into something sharper, like a blade lightly scraping porcelain. Musashi folded his hands, signaling his readiness to talk business. The men around the table leaned in. Eric straightened his tie and took a slow breath, clearly preparing to impress. He loved these rooms where he could pretend he was someone important. The tone switched fully to Japanese, elegant and measured, and I went still inside. Eric believed I was drifting off, as wives at these dinners usually did, but I sharpened every sense I had. Musashi asked a simple question. "What is your long-term vision for your department?" Eric smiled like a man stepping onto a stage. "Well," he said in Japanese, "once this investment comes through, everything will shift. I've already positioned myself as the right hand to upper management, Naomi's been helping me refine the purchasing projections. Naomi. That name sliced through me like a thin, hot wire. I kept my gaze on the tablecloth, but my pulse began to thrum in my ears. I remembered the late nights, the sudden out-of-town trips, the unexplained perfume I once found on his shirt. Every unanswered question I'd shrugged off suddenly came roaring back. Musashi nodded thoughtfully, unaware that Eric had just opened a door he could never close again. "And your wife supports your career goals?" Musashi asked gently. It wasn't an attack, just a culturally respectful question. In Japanese business culture, stability at home mattered. Eric chuckled. Actually chuckled. "Oh, Lena?" he said, waving a hand like dismissing smoke. "Of course, she supports me. She's very low maintenance. She keeps the house running. That's her strength." Low maintenance. Like a plant. Like something that didn't need attention to stay alive. I stared at the candle in front of me, blinking slowly to hold back the sting behind my eyes. "And she works as a nurse, yes?" Musashi asked. Eric laughed again, shorter, meaner. "Well, yes, but it's not real medical work. It's just a community clinic. She likes it. Makes her feel useful. But she doesn't understand important things." Important things. Like corporate spreadsheets, maybe. Or his ego. I felt that flicker again, the one Musashi noticed earlier. He caught my eye briefly. A soft crease formed between his brows. He knew. He absolutely knew something was wrong, but he remained silent. Then the conversation turned subtly, dangerously to personal conduct. Musashi mentioned corporate compliance, ethics, the importance of maintaining professional boundaries. A warning, maybe. A test. Eric leaned back casually, missing the subtext entirely. "Well, speaking of boundaries," he said with a smug grin. "Working closely with Naomi has been helpful." My heart slid down into my stomach. She understands strategy. She thinks like an executive. She's ambitious. He paused, then added with a low laugh. "Very different from my wife." I felt Musashi's gaze on me again, warm, apologetic this time, as though silently acknowledging the cruelty of what he was hearing. Eric kept talking, unaware he was burying himself deeper with every word. "The truth is," he continued, "Naomi and I have gotten close. It relieves stress. You know how it is." Then he lowered his voice even further, almost conspiratorial. "And it's not against policy if no one finds out." But it was against policy. I knew it. Musashi knew it. Eric apparently didn't care. He laughed again, so casually, so dismissively. "Besides, Lena won't ever know. She barely understands English half the time, let alone another language." The room went still. Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not violently, but cleanly, like ice splitting on a frozen lake. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. But in that silence, the last fragile piece of our marriage disintegrated. Musashi set his chopsticks down gently and said nothing. His expression was calm, but his eyes were the eyes of a man who had just learned something deeply troubling. Not just professionally, but morally. When he finally spoke, his tone had cooled several degrees. "Such matters," Musashi said slowly, "can become risky for everyone involved." Eric shrugged. "Only if someone talks." His arrogance was staggering. The dinner carried on with forced politeness, though the warmth was gone. Musashi's questions became shorter, his nods tighter, his smile thin and strained. I kept my hands perfectly still in my lap, nails digging into my palm just to keep myself grounded. I wanted to scream, to cry, to walk out, but I didn't. I sat silently in the beautiful burgundy dress I had chosen for myself, praying the shaking in my chest didn't show. And Musashi, for reasons I wouldn't understand until much later, watched over me with a kind of quiet respect. He didn't expose me. He didn't expose Eric. Not yet. But he saw me, really saw me. A nurse from a small clinic. A wife who was anything but simple. A woman who understood far more than she let on. When dinner ended, Eric shook Musashi's hand with the enthusiasm of a man convinced he had charmed a room. I bowed politely, though inside, I was hollow. On the drive back to the hotel, Eric hummed along to the radio, oblivious. "That went perfectly," he said. Musashi seemed impressed. "This could be big, Lena, really big." I stared out the window at the blur of city lights, each one reflecting the moment my world had collapsed. I whispered, because I didn't trust my voice not to break. When we reached the hotel room, Eric went straight to the shower, humming again. I sat on the bed, hands shaking, trying to swallow the bitter truth. My husband had betrayed me not just with his actions, but with his words, with his arrogance, with his belief that I would never understand. But I did. I understood everything. When the bathroom door closed, I reached for my phone with trembling fingers. Scrolled past old contacts, names from a life I'd slowly let go of. Until I landed on one. Maya, an old friend from nursing school who now worked in compliance for a major health system. I hit call. "Lena?" She answered, sleepy but concerned. My voice cracked as I whispered the words that changed both our lives. "Something happened tonight, and I need help before everything gets worse." The morning after the investor dinner, I woke up with the same sensation you feel right before a fever breaks an ache in my bones, a heaviness behind my eyes, a certainty that something inside me had shifted overnight. Eric was already gone, leaving a note on the nightstand. "Left early. Big day. Be supportive. Love you." The words felt like a joke written in permanent marker. My phone buzzed. A text from Maya sent at 7:12 a.m. "Call me when you're awake. I'm here." I called her immediately. Her voice was sharper this time, fully alert. "Lena, tell me everything from the beginning." So I did. Every word Eric said at that table, every insult he'd tossed like a coin, every detail about Naomi, every rule he had violated with that one arrogant sentence, "It's not against policy if no one finds out." Maya exhaled deeply. "Okay, listen to me clearly. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. What he did is a serious HR and ethics violation. And the things he said about transferring decision-making power to Naomi? That's not just immoral, it's dangerous for the company." Her voice sharpened. "And the affair alone is grounds for immediate investigation." I pressed my hand to my forehead, suddenly hot. Where do I even start? "With evidence," she said, quietly, calmly, patiently. "You can't confront him yet." The word yet hung between us like a promise. That day, I called in sick to the clinic, my first sick day in nearly 5 years. My supervisor sounded surprised. "You okay, Lena?" she asked softly. "I just need a day," I whispered. I wasn't ready to explain that the woman who always held everyone else together was crumbling in her own home. When Eric got home that night, he barely looked up from his phone. "Long day?" he muttered. "I'm going to shower." I nodded, watching him disappear down the hallway. He didn't notice the way I swallowed hard, or how my hands shook as I picked up his discarded jacket from the couch. The moment the bathroom door clicked shut, I opened his laptop. His password hadn't changed, still the name of our first dog. What a strange, painful irony. He locked his heart from me, but never bothered locking his devices. His email was a trove of arrogance. flirtatious messages from Naomi, calendar invites to working dinners, a folder labeled Purchasing Strategy, Private. Inside it, spreadsheets cross-referencing vendor selections with projected bonuses. Some notes were written in shorthand, but the patterns were obvious. Eric had funneled influence toward Naomi's department in ways that skirted company policy. One email thread nearly made me drop the laptop. Subject: Let's keep this between us. Naomi had written, "Don't worry, HR won't know, just like they won't know about us. Promise." Eric replied, "Lena doesn't understand how any of this works. We're safe." I closed the laptop gently, not trusting myself not to throw it. Maya came over the next evening with her thick-rimmed glasses and her "we're going to fix this" energy. She spread papers over my dining table like a battle map. "We need patterns," she said. "Transfers, emails, questionable approvals, everything must be traceable." I handed her the photos I'd taken. Her eyebrows climbed. "Oh, Lena, this is worse than I thought. He's mixing emotional misconduct with financial misconduct. This isn't just a personal issue anymore. This could cost him his career." I hesitated. Should I feel guilty about that? Maya looked up sharply. "No, he risked his own career the second he broke policy. You're not destroying anything. You're revealing what he already built." Her certainty steadied me. It reminded me of something Ayumi used to say. "Truth is not an enemy, child. Lies are." Over the next 3 weeks, my life took on a double identity. At the clinic, I was the steady nurse everyone relied on, the one who knew which kid liked stickers and which parent needed an extra moment to cry in the hallway. At home, I became a quiet collector of truth. When Eric worked late, which was often, I searched filing cabinets, sorting through old tax forms and expense reports. Maya taught me what to look for: vendor favoritism, unexplained transactions, inappropriate reimbursements. Hidden between travel receipts and purchase orders, a story began to emerge. Eric had been slowly building influence around Naomi, using their relationship to manipulate company decisions. It wasn't just unethical, it was reckless and arrogant in ways I couldn't understand. Meanwhile, Eric remained blissfully unaware. He kissed my cheek in passing. He ate the dinners I cooked. He never once suspected that the woman he believed was simple was quietly piecing together the fall of his career. One night, as I slipped another file into my purse, I caught my own reflection in the microwave door. I didn't look broken. I looked determined, different, like someone climbing out of a shadow she'd lived in for too long. Later, when Maya and I sat cross-legged on her living room floor reviewing everything, she spoke carefully. "You're ready, Lena." "For what?" I already knew. For the first step, a meeting with a labor attorney. And once we file, the company's ethics department gets everything, simultaneously. My stomach tightened. This will ruin him. Maya's expression softened, less warrior, more friend. "Eric ruined himself. You're just stepping out of the wreckage." I took a slow breath, the kind Ayumi taught me years ago. Deep in, hold, release. "Okay," I whispered. "Let's do it." A few days later, the attorney slid a folder toward me across a mahogany desk. "Once we file these," she said, "Eric will be served immediately, and trust me, your documentation is strong." My fingers trembled as I touched the folder. In that moment, I realized something astonishing. I wasn't scared of losing Eric. I was scared I had waited this long. I closed the folder. My voice didn't shake when I said, "Set the date. I'm ready." The morning the papers were served, the sky over Austin was a pale, washed-out gray. The kind of sky that made everything feel suspended, like the world was holding its breath. I sat in the attorney's conference room beside Maya, fingers curled around a warm cup of coffee I wasn't actually drinking. A digital clock on the wall ticked upward in slow, precise seconds. At 9 o'clock a.m., the divorce packet was sent for service. At 9:05, the company's ethics and compliance office received Maya's entire evidence file. By 9:22, before I even finished half my coffee, we received a single-line confirmation email. Employee Eric Granger has been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. I closed my eyes. Not in triumph, not in grief, just in release. A weight I'd carried for years finally loosened its grip. Maya squeezed my hand. "You did it," she said softly. "You're safe now." But safety wasn't something realized instantly. It crept in slowly, like dawn. Eric called and called and called. By noon, I had 30 missed calls. By evening, 47. Some voicemails were angry, hot, and loud. Some were confused. Some were pleading. I didn't listen to any of them. Maya did. "You don't need to take that in," she said gently. "Let me filter the noise." So while Eric unraveled in real time, his voice bouncing from fury to desperation, I sat quietly on Maya's couch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the hum of her refrigerator and the distant sound of neighborhood cars. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace. 2 days later, it was time to retrieve my things from the house. Legally, Eric had been notified. Emotionally, I knew he wasn't ready. Maya insisted I take a police escort, just standard protocol for tension-filled separations, she said, so an officer stood quietly beside us as we pulled up the driveway. The house looked the same, but everything in me felt different. Eric opened the door before I even reached it. His face was unshaven, his hair messy, dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 2 days. "Lena," he said, voice hoarse. Please just talk to me." I lifted a hand slightly toward the officer. "It's okay," I said. Eric swallowed hard and stepped back to let us inside. The living room looked untouched pillows where I left them, my blanket still draped over the arm of the couch. It was strange how a house could stay the same while a marriage disintegrated overnight. "Lena," he started again as I moved toward the stairs. I didn't know about the papers, about the investigation. This is all a misunderstanding. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll end things with Naomi, I swear." I paused on the steps. "Eric," I said quietly, "this isn't sudden. You just never saw it coming." He shook his head, voice rising. "You don't even know what was said at that dinner. Those were business strategies, things people say to impress investors. You misunderstood. You don't speak Japanese." The irony hit me like a cold wind. Here he was, the man who said I couldn't understand complex things, telling me I'd gotten it wrong because he assumed I lived in permanent ignorance. I turned slowly. "Eric," I said, meeting his eyes. I understood every word. He froze. A hollow laugh slipped out of him. "Lena, no, you didn't. You can't possibly." I switched languages. In perfect Japanese, gentle, steady, every syllable pronounced the way Ayumi taught me, I spoke the words he had said that night. "My wife is simple. She doesn't understand business. Naomi gets me. And it's not against policy if no one finds out." Eric's jaw fell open. His eyes widened in terror, then disbelief. "You speak Japanese?" The question came out strangled. "For years," I replied calmly. "You just never asked." He stumbled backward onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. "Oh my God," he whispered. "You heard everything." I did. Eric looked up at me, And for the first time in our entire marriage, I saw him truly afraid not of me, but of consequences, of the person he really was being exposed. Lena, please. This will ruin me. I stepped closer, my voice soft, but steady as bedrock. You ruined yourself the moment you betrayed your vows and your own company's policies. You lied to me. You used me as a prop, and you hurt me in a language you thought would keep me blind. He shook his head rapidly, tears forming. I can change. I swear. Just tell the company, tell them it wasn't what it looked like. I stared at him, at the man I'd once believed would be my partner for life. A man who only now realized the cost of his own actions. Eric, I said quietly, I'm not saving the version of you that broke me. His shoulders collapsed inward. I turned away and went upstairs to pack the rest of my things. The officer stood by the door. Maya helped fold clothes into suitcases. Eric didn't speak again. When I came back down, I placed my house key on the entry table. This is goodbye, I said gently. He didn't reach for me. He didn't argue. He just stared, hollow, emptied of every illusion he once held. And as I walked out the door, down the driveway, and into Maya's car, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not sadness, not guilt. Freedom. 2 weeks later, with the divorce underway and Eric's investigation still active, I booked a ticket one way to Japan. The place where the language that saved me was born. The place where I hoped to rebuild the parts of myself I'd forgotten. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would lead me right back to the man who had noticed me before I noticed myself. Musashi. Japan felt like another universe the moment I stepped off the plane. The air at Haneda Airport carried a quiet stillness even in the middle of all the movement. Announcements echoed softly. People walked with calm purpose, and the neon signs mixed with the gentle hum of conversation in a way that wrapped around me like warmth. For the first time in months, I allowed air into the deepest parts of my lungs. I wasn't anyone's wife here. I wasn't anyone's disappointment. I wasn't invisible. I was simply Lena, a woman standing at the beginning of something new. I stayed in a small guest house in Kyoto, the kind with tatami mats and paper sliding doors that made a soft whisper when you opened them. Every morning, I drank tea on the wooden veranda while the sun crawled quietly over the tiled rooftops. I visited shrines where the air smelled of cedar and earth. I wandered through narrow streets where the wind carried the sound of bells from bicycles passing by. I walked along the Kamo River, watching herons wade in the still water. But the place that undid me the most was a small garden behind a temple, tranquil, simple, almost untouched. I sat on the wooden bench there one afternoon and whispered, Ayumi, you would have loved this. I felt her presence, felt her stories, felt the quiet strength she planted in me years ago. For the first time since the marriage shattered, I let myself cry not from pain, but from release. The grief left my body like a long exhale. On the 7th day of my trip, my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. No one in America needed me urgently anymore. But when I glanced at the screen, I froze. Email from Mr. Musashi. Subject, a conversation, if you are willing. My heart thudded once, hard. I opened it. Ms. Morales, I understand you are currently in Japan. I will be in Kyoto tomorrow for meetings. If you have time, I would be honored to speak with you. Musashi. My hands shook slightly. He knew I was here? Had Eric's investigation reached the investors? Did Musashi want answers? Closure? Distance? Part of me wanted to run. Another part the part Ayumi helped grow, knew it was time to face whatever came next. I replied simply, "Yes, I can meet." We met at a quiet cafe overlooking a Zen rock garden. Musashi arrived precisely on time. He bowed his head politely when he saw me. "Ms. Morales," he said softly, "thank you for meeting with me." "Of course," I replied, returning a small bow. We sat. The waiter placed tea before us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Musashi said, "I owe you honesty." He folded his hands. His posture, as always, was effortless dignity. "In the dinner we shared months ago, I sensed something. A moment, very small, when your expression changed. Only slightly, most people would have missed it." I swallowed. "You knew I understood." He nodded once. "I suspected." The eyes reveal what the mouth chooses not to say. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. So someone had seen me that night. Someone had noticed when my own husband hadn't looked deeply at me in years. "I didn't speak up," Musashi continued, "because it was not my place to expose you. But I also understood the pain in your silence." The tears I fought back trembled, but didn't fall. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me when I was trying so hard not to be seen." He inclined his head again, a gesture of respect, not pity. Then he placed a folder on the table. "I reached out because my company is beginning a new initiative in the United States, a community health project for underserved families. Its success requires someone who understands American healthcare and who understands Japanese communication style." He paused for a moment, letting the meaning land. "Your background as a nurse, your compassion, and your fluency in both languages make you uniquely qualified." I blinked, disoriented. "Are you offering me a job?" "A leadership role," he clarified. "Project manager, full autonomy, significant responsibility." "But why me?" My voice cracked. Musashi took a slow sip of tea before answering. "Because I do not judge a person by the role someone else assigns them. I judge by the strength they carry quietly." His eyes softened. "And you, Ms. Morales, carry great strength." My throat tightened. I realized then that Japan wasn't just a place I came to escape. It was the place where my next chapter waited. 3 months later, I returned to Texas, not to Eric, not to the house we shared, but to sign a contract with Musashi's company and begin training. Eric sent one final email during that time. A long apology, an admission of regret, a plea for forgiveness. I read it once, sighed softly, and archived it. Forgiveness didn't require reconnection. I could release him from my heart without inviting him back into my life. The years that followed were the most meaningful of my life. I managed health outreach programs, helped build clinics in underserved counties, and worked with families who reminded me of the children I once cared for in pediatrics. I traveled between Texas and Japan often. I gained colleagues who became friends. I grew into a version of myself I didn't know was possible. And through it all, I carried Ayumi's lessons and Musashi's quiet faith in me. I never remarried, not because I feared love, but because my life felt full in ways marriage had never given me. Sometimes, at night, when I practiced Japanese with my students or answered emails from Kyoto, I'd whisper the words I whispered before that terrible dinner. "Watashi wa omowareru yori tsuyoi." I am stronger than I seem. Now, I finally believed it. As I sit here telling this story years later, heart healed, life rebuilt, I want to say this directly to whoever is listening. If you feel invisible in your own home, if someone has convinced you that your dreams are silly or your voice is small, if you've ever been underestimated by someone who promised to love you, remember this: You are not the limited version of yourself they imagined. You are the version you choose to become. Sometimes, the thing that breaks you is the thing that frees you. And the language that once hid your pain may become the language that saves your life.